by all external observation and measures, I was kicking ass, right? Within 4 years, I'd have an MBA from top business school. I'd be a certified public accountant. I'd have terrific work experience. I could literally chart my own path and go into investment banking, trading, stay in consulting, start my own business. I could do whatever, but I was miserable. Like I literally felt like I was dying inside. I was having this kind of existential crisis. And so I was looking for ways, of course, I kept physical training because physical training provided a relief valve at least, right? That was a crutch for me. So I kept doing hard physical training. I'd run every morning 6 miles. And I went to the gym at lunch when my peers were going to, getting their high carb hamburgers or whatever. I would just bang out a high intensity interval training, before we knew what that was. And then at night, I had this window, 2.5 hours between when Coopers would let us off and when we had to be at World Trade Center for school, because it was a cohort, so there are others in my program. And I looked at that time and said, there's something I can do here that's still developmental. That's going to be good for me. Maybe help me out of this situation to help me understand more. And I was interested in the martial arts because at Colgate, my freshman roommate, he came in as a real arrogant jerk. But what he found karate, right? So I went into swimming and he went into karate. 4 years later, he had a black belt and he had completely transformed. His whole character had softened. It was much humbler. He was heading to Japan to teach English and continue his karate studies. And I didn't feel really different, except for that experience with London, which gave me confidence to get a job. I didn't emotionally feel like I'd evolved. And so I saw that and I was like, there's something about what he went through that produced demonstrable change, at least from my perspective. So I was thinking about this martial art idea, and I was walking home one night down 23rd Street. I lived on 22nd and Broadway, and I heard these shouts coming from this upstairs window, and I stopped and I look up and I was standing under the sign of World Sado Karate Headquarters. I'm like, serendipity, right? And I go up and I see the Grandmaster, Tadashi Nakamura, in the middle of the floor running a class, literally about 100 students. And this guy, I just kind of stood in awe because he was different than anybody I'd ever experienced. Not just that he was Japanese, but his presence, right? And his demeanor, right? He had this intense stability about him and seriousness, but then it was absolutely balanced with this really lightness and this playfulness. He was an enlightened master before I even knew what that was. I'm staring at that. And so I said, this is my mentor. So I started training with him, and a couple months into it, I stayed to watch a black belt class. And that was really cool, inspiring. After the black belt class, everyone was being shuffled out and they would turn the lights off and they lit a candle in this one corner, the lights down, but lit a candle. And about 10 black belts pulled out these wooden benches and lined them up. And I was like, what are they doing over there? I said, oh, that's the Zen class. Said, did some research on it. Didn't really understand what it was, but I asked Nakamura if I could join that class. And he said, sure. So I started studying Zen with him on these Thursday night hour-long sits, and then I got my own little Zazen bench and added it to my morning routine. That was a life-changing moment. Because on the one hand, I'm like really starting to be eaten away inside. Like I had this existential angst. I couldn't open up, right? I burned through relationships with women because I was really shut down emotionally. I was abused as a kid. And I just didn't have any language or strategies, and therapy wasn't a thing back then that I could access. Those types of crises, right, usually lead to major breakdown. They often happen much older, that kind of midlife existential crisis. So I feel very blessed to have had this at 21, 22 years old. What saved my ass was meditation. So just like how Mother Nature's kind of saved me in my youth, meditation did the same thing. Here in the middle of New York City, I would sit down on that bench and all the cacophony of the outside world would just fall away. And the process worked, right? There's something about the Zen process, which, they start out with concentration training, and you already have the breath work and the physical mountain stuff that accrues to the physical practice, right? A lot of breath work, a lot of moving with the breath, learning how to control your mind and emotions through movement, right? That's what a good movement somatic practice will do, like a martial art or Tai Chi or Qigong. But then all that is preparation to sit down and stabilize your mind through attention control and concentration practice, which was the basic Zen training that Nakamura taught. And I just did that. I followed his protocol. Inhale, exhale, count one, don't think of anything. Inhale, exhale, count two, don't think of anything. If you think of something, go back to zero. Start over. Try it. It's surprisingly hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And my list here, I want to have you talk a little bit about box breathing.
That's where I developed box breathing. Before I ever learned controlled breathing in yoga years later, I was an endurance athlete. I'd inhale, I wanted to naturally hold my breath. So I would inhale and I would hold my breath, and then I would exhale, and then I would just pause and hold my breath. And I found that led to a really calm body with a clear mind. That was kind of the mental physical posture that stayed with me, not just during the meditation, but for long after, until eventually my breathing pattern literally shifted and changed to where I was always breathing through my nose, 5 count in, 5 count out, or holding my breath, depending on what I was doing, which had extraordinary benefits. So one of the core teachings now that I teach. Anyway, so I'm having this existential crisis around my life, my meaning. What am I here for? Why am I so miserable being a suit and collar guy on Wall Street, working at a cubicle? And so I'm sitting with those things in meditation, but I'm coming out of meditation feeling really good about myself. It was like a total refuge. Like I would feel really good. I would be in these like extended flow states, and I felt like everything was rich and thick. And so I was beginning to experience this dichotomy between what I was conditioned to be for my entire life up to that point, and this experience of peace, and a deeper sense of okayness that I could tap into and touch in deep meditation. So I was like, so I want to really kind of stick with that. I didn't want to quit. I wanted to kind of keep going deeper and deeper and exploring that, because I wanted more of that and less of that. The process of meditation is really interesting. It's like the ripening of a fruit, right? You can't rush it. And a lot of people are, in America especially, are impatient. And so they sit down and they try meditation for a few weeks, and they bounce around from different apps and guided visualizations, which, by the way, is not really meditation. That's just relaxation. Meditation is the process of self-inquiry, bringing what is unconscious or beneath your consciousness into your conscious awareness, ultimately leading to the realization that you are all that is, source, God. And that realization can be really sudden, as they talk about with Satori and the Zen tradition, or it can be gradual. But even if it's gradual, the final dropping of the fruit is sudden, right? So it's both. So I was experiencing this gradual, and I'm not talking about after 2 or 3 months. I've been talking about a year and a half into my practice, and 2 years in my practice. I would go into these Zen sessions for the long ones, and I would kind of drop into this timeless space. And every time I would come out of that, not only would I have this rich sense of everything's alive and, crackling electricity, but I kept having the sense that I was meant to be a warrior, that I was a warrior. It wasn't in words. It was just a total sensation. If I'm that, then why am I here in New York working on becoming a CPA, pushing a pencil? I started to take that seriously, and then I started to ask different questions. I never learned to ask good questions. It wasn't part of my growing up. We didn't sit around the table and ask good questions, and there was no inquiry. I didn't learn the art of active inquiry. I started to inquire, ask myself better questions. Like, if I'm supposed to be a warrior, then how? What does that look like? And if I'm supposed to be a warrior, then how did I get here? Why am I in a suit and tie every day? Can I be a warrior as a CPA or a business guy? I don't know. Didn't seem like it. So I started to ask better questions, and then answers would come to me. And I've since learned that if you can frame a well-framed question, then you already know the answer. You just got to sit quietly and wait for it. So I started to get answers, and that's when the Navy SEALs were revealed to me. Randomly walking home one night and passing a recruiting office and seeing a poster titled "Be Someone Special" with really cool imagery of Navy SEALs doing cool shit.
Quick questions there. So that was about 1980 or so?
87, 88. 88.
I think it was in 1990 the Navy SEALs movie came out, and I saw that, and it was kind of a similar experience for me. The second question is, during our coaching session a week or so ago, you mentioned something along the lines of the quality of your life is equal to the quality of the questions you ask. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the quality of your life will be determined by the quality of the questions you ask. Started to ask those questions and contemplate and meditate on, who am I? What am I here for? What's my purpose? What are my passions? What are my principles? What's my mission? I hadn't asked those questions, those high quality questions, I would probably be back running the family business and I'd be miserable. I'd be living the life of quiet desperation that I was already experiencing in my 20s. So it's very important you ask good questions, but you got to ask them with absolute stillness. This is where prayer comes. You're either asking your higher power, like God, or you're asking your higher power, which is you in the non-physical form, right? I believe that a small percentage of us is projected into this reality like a hologram, but the vast majority of what we would call ourselves, capital S selves, is non-physical, it's spiritual, right? It's not like you're incarnated and suddenly you're cut off from your spirit, or that your spirit just comes with you in the form of a soul. No, you're always connected like a tether. It's the energizing force of your life. So when you're asking a good question, you're asking your higher self, which includes your future self, by the way. Everything that's happened or is supposed to happen in your life has already happened. You can get information from your higher self about the future.
Yeah, and real quick, Mark just went real deep. I'm sure a lot of people that have never meditated or maybe never even thought about being separate from their physical body or their soul being separate from their physical body. What I challenge you to do is, we're going to touch on Mark's books here in a little while. We'll probably touch on some other books too, but if what Mark just said was confusing or you didn't understand it, I highly recommend that you do some studying, because what he said, it's almost like being able to tell the future if you ask the right questions. They're already there. Those answers are there. And it's almost like magic once you get into the right kind of wavelength or flow. Spiritually, you're on this wavelength that is obviously on another level compared to the average person who has no experience with meditation, no experience with martial arts. Very good material there that I hope a lot of the viewers will dig into.
Let me put a bow in this story because it's pretty interesting, and talk a little bit more about the metaphysical piece and how it can support you. So you can ask good questions of your higher self, your spiritual self, your future self. They're all the same thing. You will get answers, but you have to be really still to be able to discern. And that's hard for people because we're really distractible. Back then, we didn't have social media. We didn't have iPhones. We didn't have the internet. And I didn't spend much time watching TV at all, except for a football game or so on the weekend. You have to learn to be really still. And the only way to get really still is through a process of meditation. When you get really still and you ask these questions, you start to get these answers. If you don't take any action, then you're going to have some challenging things come your way, because now you have an obligation. Like your higher self is saying, okay, good, you're ready. Here's the path. Like you're supposed to be a warrior. And if I had let my ego, which tried like hell to derail me from that, like, oh, you can't do that. What if you fail? You're going to end up just being in the Navy, driving a boat or something. What if it's going to be a 6-year commitment? You're going to fall way behind your peers. You're not going to make any money. You're basically choosing a life of not poverty, but my peers are going on to make millions and millions of dollars. They're not going to have any of that, blah, blah, blah. Ego, which is your left linear brain, which creates this experience of separation in time and space, and this really concretized identity of like, I am Mark. It's all based on fear. It's all based on needing to protect status quo, to protect your body, to protect it from any kind of pain or suffering. And so it wants to avoid challenges. But as you know, the way to grow and learn is through challenges. Now, if you don't start to align with, like if you have a growing awareness that you're meant to do something and you're avoiding it because you're afraid, like for me, one of the things would be the judgment from my peers and my family, because I'm walking away from this really perceivably good career to join the Navy, which in my family was something that people did who didn't have any other options. So my ego is telling me, don't do it, don't go. My spirit's saying that's the way to go. I had the courage to really lean into that and say, you know what? I'm feeling such existential crisis over here. That path that my ego's trying to keep me on doesn't feel good to me. So if I stay on that path, I don't like the future I see. And I can visualize that. I visualize the future. I didn't like what I saw. Even though I probably would have stayed in New York and gotten my big 7th-degree black belt with Nakamura, there would have been positive aspects where I probably would have made a lot of money. I wouldn't have felt good about myself, and I would have walked away from my calling. And there would have been serious health consequences or some sort of major crisis or challenge as a result of that, because of that internal disconnect. Now, on the corollary to that is when you do align with and start to move toward your calling, then synchronicity happens. Things flow for you. It just becomes effortless and it becomes joyful. and it stops feeling like work. And that's what I experienced when I was shown the Navy SEALs through that poster. That was synchronicity. My officer recruiter, he first tried to talk me out of it. He said, it's extremely hard to get into the SEALs from the civilian world. It may take 1 or 2 people a year. Most of the officers come from the Naval Academy or Reserve Officer Training Corps, or they're already officers in some other domain in the military. And I forced him to put a package in just on blind faith. But the one thing that I wanted to share that also I'm pretty certain put me over the edge with that is visualization. So I already had this Zen practice and I already had a breath practice. After my runs, I would do my breath practice and then meditate. And at the end of the meditation, I started visualizing. And I just took this on blind faith because my college swimming coach was kind of a pioneer with sports visualization. So this is 1983. Well, he asked me using a stopwatch to visualize my race, which is a 200-meter breaststroke. It was really hard. So I was trying to do it at night. I was living in the fraternity. There's a lot of distractions, as you can imagine. I tried to quit. And he was like, Mark, don't quit. You got to trust me on this. This is really valuable. And so because I respected him, I kept doing it. I finally was able to swim the whole race in my head. It took like two months of practice. And every time I stopped the stopwatch, I would get a time that was roughly 3 seconds faster than my fastest time. That fall, I go away to that London trip I talked about earlier. So I didn't swim. And I come back in the spring. I hadn't swum for a whole year. And I run into the coach and he says, hey, welcome back. Hey, we got our championship meet next weekend. I consider you still part of the team. You want to get in the water? Of course, my ego brain is saying no, but my head is nodding yes. So I find myself on the blocks, gun goes off, I jump in the water and I'm swimming. I'm having this incredible race. Like I've swum this before, but I'm super relaxed. I touched the pad and I got the time that I had visualized.
Wow.
Last race, the fastest time I'd ever swum by far.
Wow.
And it was just like, quietly, I didn't tell anyone about it. I was just like, wow, that's interesting. But several years later now, I've got my package in to be a Navy SEAL officer. I'm training hard, right? And my mind is saying, I'm going to go for this if I get in. So I start visualizing myself. I said, well, I wonder, visualization works so well for me in terms of a sport outcome. What if I look at BUD/S, Navy SEAL training, like a sport, and I practiced it in my mind? So there was a recruiting video also by the name of Be Someone Special. And I watched it 20 or 30 times and it had all phases of BUD/S. And I put myself into that video in my mind. And so I put myself and I saw myself going through first phase. I saw myself going through second and third phase. I saw myself graduating. I began to, really add a lot of emotion and energy and color and movement to it. I just kept doing it on blind faith. 9 months into that practice, like none of these practices are quick fixes. It's a practice. That's why we call it practice. It's something that you got to do every day. And so 9 months into this practice, I suddenly had this definitive shift. It almost felt like a ripple in consciousness where something changed, like a phase shift. And prior to this phase shift, I'm hoping that I'm going to get this SEAL contract. And suddenly after this phase shift, I was certain that I would get this SEAL contract and that I would be a Navy SEAL. There was no question in my mind. It had already happened. I call that winning in your mind before you step foot in the battlefield. And 2 days later or so, Nick, the recruiter, called me and said, congratulations, Mark. I don't believe it, but you got the billet. Visualization, breath control, mental management, asking really good questions, sitting for answers, all of these skills, right, were so powerful and important and literally shattered my life from this, what would have been existential crisis, life of quiet desperation as a CPA consultant, business guy, to suddenly I'm a Navy SEAL #1 in my training class, SEAL leader at SEAL Team 3. And the skills that I had developed and used, I brought with me and I started teaching them to my SEAL teammates, starting with my first group of people, my boat crew of 6 others. And guess what? Out of a class of 185 like badasses in my SEAL training class 170, 19 of us graduated. And I was the honor man, #1 graduate, and my other 6 teammates graduated with me that day. We were using these skills, breath control, mental management, positive self-talk, visualization, radical focusing, and we were doing it as a team, supporting each other, and actually like really, really pushing for all of us to succeed. And that was rare because it was a dog-eat-dog world with everyone else. So I gave you a little mini class in mental toughness right there, and using the skills, right? And I teach to this very day to really refine them. How do you like really bring a team to a level where they have 20 times the potential, right, that any one of the individuals have? It's the same skills, but done. You got to do the practice as a team.
We hope you enjoyed this no surrender quick lesson from episode 1 with Mark Devine. Mark and his techniques have changed my life and the lives of many others in so many positive ways. Implement this lesson and reap the rewards. And remember, practice makes perfect. To watch or listen to the full episode, please click the link in the description below. Thanks for listening, and as always, we'd be very grateful if you'd like, subscribe, and/or share our content, as we're here to help as many people as possible, and we'll get there much faster with your continued support.